gonna die. We all are gonna die. We all are gonna die. We all are gonna die. Why don't we help each other prepare for it? Without death there cannot be life. I'm talking about end of life conversations, conversations about the end of life. Death and dying, grief and loss, conversations about the end of life.
Well, just to mention that the four arts that I focused on in the book, The Art of Grieving, and I had this notion that maybe grieving itself should be an art because it's something we're going to do all our lives.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, maybe the arts are the tools.
Welcome to this episode of End of Life Conversations. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother, Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, grief and loss, and the end of life.
We really enjoy all of our excellent and insightful guests. They generously tell their stories with compassion and wisdom. We also want to thank Wakil and Wendy's children and partners for that wonderful introductory song. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Today we are joined by Dr. Sheila K. Collins. Sheila knows grief, having lost a son to AIDS and a daughter to breast cancer. She chronicles her experiences in her award-winning memoir, Warrior Mother, Fierce Love, Unbearable Loss, and the Rituals That Heal. In her many years, she has found careers as a therapist, professor of social work, and dance. She applies wisdom from her myriad careers and has guided thousands of people through tough challenges, inspiring them to turn grief into a gift.
Sheila has delighted audiences worldwide with demonstrations of how art-based expressions such as dance, storytelling, song, and music can help anyone turn life's toughest challenges into growth. Her 2016 TEDx talk, When Death Threatens Someone We Love, offers a poignant perspective for anyone accompanying a loved one through illnesses and even death. Her first book, co-authored with Christine Gautreau, Still Point, a self-care playbook for caregivers to find ease and time to breathe and reclaim joy, has become a popular online course for professional and family caregivers. Sheila currently directs the Wing and a Prayer Pittsburgh Players, an interplay-based performance troupe that helps individuals and organizations tell their stories in transformative ways. Thank you so much for being here, Sheila.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that name. That's a great name, Wing and a Prayer.
Yes.
And in fact,
yes.
the way Sheila and I connected was that my wife was at an interplay event here in Seattle, and that's where she heard about Sheila. Or Sheila, maybe you were out here teaching it, and she said, you got to talk
out
to this
there
person.
and then also online too later. So yes,
Oh, yeah.
it's great. Yeah.
Great. Well, we always begin with the same question because we love this question and it helps us kind of get to know you a little better. So can you tell us a little bit about when you first became aware of death?
Well, I think it is when my father took me to his rural community. He grew up on a farm. And so I don't know how old I was, but maybe 5 or 6. Anyway, we went to an aunt's funeral and we went to her home, and here was her body laid out in the parlor, in the front parlor. And I was so taken back by that because even although I'm pretty old, I had not had that experience. It used to be what everybody did. So,
right.
But in my family, we had already, moved more into the medicalization of these things. So I think that was probably the first time that I can remember just seeing a dead body, and people surrounding that and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's very true that used to be, everybody used to do that.
Norm.
And,
yeah.
And some people still are, and some people are reclaiming that too now,
yes.
which I think is really sweet. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the industrialization of our lives, right? That's changed because and I was just, as you started saying that, I was thinking it is a shame that more young people don't have that experience either. So, So Sheila, that first death made you aware of some shift in human experiences. And how did that contribute to your life? Like, how did that frame your interaction with folks at the end of life?
Well, I'm not sure. I think the other thing I have to say is that my father was also a very history buff, So on this trip to my aunt's and back, I'm sure we stopped at any of the historical markers that there were. And many of these historical markers were of cemeteries. And so we kids would get out of the car and go, traipsing around and looking at these markers. And I think that had a more profound effect on me because we would see kids that were younger than us there. So that did something to my brain about the notion that people die at any time, not just my old aunt, but, so that, I don't know, that perspective, it just seemed that's the way it is. So when my own children, they weren't babies, but, they were young adults, when my young adult, especially the second one, my cousin said to me, "This shouldn't be happening to you." I said, "What do you mean? Who should be happening to?" She said, "I don't know, somebody that hasn't had it happen to him already." But that notion of this is an interruption in the way that life is, that your children would die before you. I didn't have that concept.
Yeah.
I didn't. I mean, of course, I didn't want that, but that isn't the way I looked at it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that, or we mentioned that in the bio, that you had lost your son and daughter, both son and daughter.
Yes. My son died of AIDS at 31, and my daughter died of breast cancer at 42.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the harder things that we go through, is losing our children. We know that. So thank you for sharing that. We hear these stories, and we interviewed somebody last week whose 14-year-old daughter died, and she wrote a whole memoir about it, which is also sounds like what happened to you. And maybe that's what we could talk about next. Talk a little about your work, the role and the work you have, and these books that you've written. And tell us more about those and how those came up.
Well, I was a social worker and I was a teacher, and so I had learned the theories, of based on Freud and all that, And when I'm going through it, it's not what I thought. It's not what I was taught. And I even say to people now, we're taught things that are not so. Well, we know it's not so we have to unlearn what we learned. So I think I began to feel like there was some, well, I don't know if you could say it this way, but there is some good news in the process. And so it's not all just horrible. It's horrible at times. I mean, I'll buy that. So I wanted to understand better what it was that was really happening at another level, I guess, in that whole going through. Well, with my son, when he was diagnosed with AIDS, that was a death sentence. So there wasn't, he was not going to live to be an old man. We knew that. And so that was a 4-year journey. And in that case, there was a lot of, he was told not to tell anyone. There was so much, there was so much stigma related to that.
Yeah.
And then, so we didn't have the supportive community going through that, the larger community. We had friends. So then 8 years later, my daughter goes through breast cancer, and you fall into a huge community of support, and she did, and we did. And the difference between those two things was so vivid. And so that was another thing that I recognized that was taught to me by this experience, the difference between having that community support and not having it, and having to be cautious. My son he wanted to keep working. And so the AIDS outreach people said to him, "Well, don't tell anybody, even your best friend. I mean, we have lawyers that we can try to get your job back, but you don't really want that." So that going through that aspect of it. So yes, it took a long time for me to get good enough to write it, I always say, because I was an academic and we have terrible habits about how we write. Everything is in the third person removed.
Right.
I don't know.
No emotions, no spirit. Yeah.
I mean, so I knew I didn't want it to be that kind of a book.
Right.
Yeah. So I had to give myself, the opportunity to kind of give myself a course or something. And so I did that for several years before I wrote the book. And it was, of course, I got a lot from it in the process of, because grief is processing loss. So
Yeah.
one of the ways you can do it is writing, and you don't have to carry it to the extremes that I did, but, to get it published, but then the next journey was to recognize where people are with the whole topic and how uncomfortable people are. So as a performer, we're doing interplay programs, and we're taking the book and doing stories from it. And people that are there love it, but they're very nervous about inviting anybody. They might not be ready, they might not be ready for this experience. And really a concern of, I think, not knowing how to companion one another.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Sheila, I bear witness to the loneliness of walking your son into the end alone with him. And that's seriously, I feel it, like if,
Well,
and I think that's what people sometimes experience with the shame of the languaging around being beaten up by cancer or, losing to death. And that doesn't distill a sense of like, I think it creates more anguish for us as a society. So your story is so relevant even today and so important because there is this element of like, oh, I shouldn't tell people that I'm that sick, and I should just like carry on and show up. But
and yet I did have some close people. I have a women's group I've been with since 1991. So that's, I felt they're going with me through this. Always, through all of it, and still, but then that was when I came up with the most recent book, is The Art of Grieving, how art and art making help us live our best lives. Because so it's like having that experience taught me about what is it that helps us? What is it that helped me? Because I was having a different experience than some other people were. And many of my clients or my friends or my neighbors were not having the same experience that I was having. And so that made me recognize that we need help in the processing of it. And the arts are such a wonderful tool. And in fact, now we are getting more scientific information about what music does, what dance does, what storytelling does, just to say the name of the person and bring them into the room. So,
Yeah.
Wow.
So right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why we're here, right?
That's right.
Make sure that story gets told.
When I think about how we got it wrong, is that the way I tell it now is we have in our brains an image of stair steps that we climb. And so then you get, you have anger, or then you have depression, or whatever it is. But you get to the top and you dust your hands off and you say, okay, well, that's what I'm, except that's not how it is. So nobody does it.
At all.
So everybody feels bad about themselves.
Right. Yeah. Or they worry they're not progressing in the right amount of time, or
well, that's right. Exactly. So this is where I have an art piece here. I had a young woman do an image of a spiral, because that is the path that energy takes. And in our brains, and as the season comes around, we have memory of what happened. Our bodies even have the memory when we don't. This was something that was interesting with clients sometimes. A client would say, I don't know what's the matter with me. I just, I nearly had a wreck, and I'm just, I'm not sleeping. They don't know what's wrong. And so then you say, well, is there anything that happened this time of year? Then, and then they going in the search, yes. And it might be somebody's death. It might be a diagnosis that happened at that time. Put everything in a different light or something, but the body remembers.
Absolutely.
Yes. Get it into the brain.
Yeah.
Well, the body remembers, the wind remembers, the earth remembers, right? Or the whole everything.
It's the seasons of it.
The seasons, yes.
The seasons of it. Yes.
Yeah. And if you don't pay attention, it'll knock you on the head.
Well, and it knocks you on the head anyway sometimes. So one of the stories in the book, I work with a group. I work with two different groups of nuns, sisters,
Mm-hmm.
who are in some ways experts on some parts of grief, which is one of them, the ritual. The need for ritual, the need for, as a group, they really had that. But some other things were harder for them. So one of the sisters told me the story. So she's in the grocery store. It's a lovely day. And she starts just immediately coming unglued, crying, remembering her colleague and best friend that had died several weeks before, and she didn't know why it was coming on her then in the middle of the grocery store until she looked around and she realized that she was in the bakery section. And what she was smelling was mincemeat pie.
Wow.
And that was her friend's. This woman was the expert on mincemeat pies. So we can have a smell, a scent, a song,
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
something that can take us back to
Right.
that,
Yeah, that's so good, so important.
And if you know that, you know you're not going crazy.
Going crazy.
Yeah.
Look around and see, of course, that's my
yeah.
connection. That's the
Yeah.
That's
connection.
great. Good thing
So-
for people to have in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And we always want to remind them of these particularities with seasons, right? But so what are your challenges that you find as you're out in the world? Like I heard one already that inviting loved ones into interplay, talking about death might actually make people feel a little squeamish or uncomfortable.
Well, yeah,
What other
I think so. I think that's it. I think there's another thing about a kind of loneliness for somebody who is really, I know you're focused right on the end of life. That is what your program is called. What about the end of life? And when you have gone through that with someone, you are not the same. And you have some things. I felt I had some things that were so wonderful and beautiful. I wanted in some ways to tell everybody. I wanted them to know. And people are not really up for that.
I know that. I'm very well aware.
but so what I've done, I've thought about it this way now. I'm of the generation where we did not, when we were going to have babies, we did not just let the guys run the show, the docs. So I was in that first group that we decided we were going to take that back. And we were going to learn how could we want the doctors to be there for, that we're not saying we don't want anything, but we don't want it to be what my mother had, which was she was put out and 3 days later woke up. I mean, she didn't remember
Twilight
having a baby.
births.
She was not there for that. And so we were saying, no, we want to be there for that. And yes, there's pain. Yes. But you learn how to work with it, how to, so I think that's where we are with the process of death. I mean,
Beautiful.
we're starting to take that back because this transition is, it's magical in many ways. It's amazing. And what set me up for that was my very best friend. So my son had been diagnosed with AIDS. So I knew what my future was going to look like. And about a year later, my best friend, she was, I think, 62, something like that. She had a cancer diagnosis several years before. And anyway, she calls me and says, it's everywhere and I don't have very long. And I want you to come and be with me. That's what she said. And she also said something else very strange. She said, you come and be with me and then I'll be with you when it's your turn. That's what she said. She said that. I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I thought, I don't know how that's going to work, but okay. So I went there and we both thought it was like, we're just going to be, how much time, half an hour, 2 hours. We didn't know. We were but between the two of us, we didn't know. And the only thing I had was that the leader of my women's group was a Native American teacher and also a Jungian, therapist. So she had a lot of wisdom and she was on the phone, as my coach. I mean, I would call her, okay, what do we do now? And so she would say things like, well, you've entered ceremonial time. ceremonial time is when the past, the present, and the future merge together. And it is, there is nothing except that moment, that time. And
Wow.
it is incredible.
Yeah.
So even experiencing that, and so here we were, and she was in the hospital. And so people were dropping by, and, and we would meditate together every morning. And then she would say to me, "This is taking longer than I thought it would. What do you think?" So the kind of intimacy that we had in that time was an incredible gift. What I tell people now, and I think it helps people to know when they lose somebody that is so close to them. And I just say, well, I'll tell you this, Rose died, 30 years ago. And I can tell you there has never been anything that has happened in my life that I didn't already know what Rose would say about it. I mean, totally.
Yeah.
She is so much a part of me and I of her that, I can call on her. I can call on her.
She's one of your ancestors, your beloved ancestor.
Exactly. Yes. So I had
what
that
a beautiful story.
Having that experience with Rose then made it possible, I think, for me to be with my son when he was, and in his situation, he came home. So we weren't in a hospital. With Rose, we were in a hospital. But they made it so that room was a hospice room. And so they weren't trying to, put wires in and all that. I mean, it was, they would just keep her comfortable. So it would be that kind of palliative care sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, and so with Rose, that set me up to understand also, even in that case, I had the most amazing experience of song or singing. There are now choirs that people that go to somebody's bedside and sing to them.
Yeah.
And
we interviewed a Threshold choir, right? Yeah, we interviewed them.
Yes.
That's
well,
sweet.
I had never
really
heard
beautiful.
of that. I hadn't heard of that. But I'm with her all this time, and her, seems like she's close. And the nurse said, well, if she keeps breathing like that, she's not going to be here very long. Her breathing had changed. So I just held her hand and I started singing to her. I never heard of anybody doing that. I just felt like I was going to do that. So I started. So it's a song from my women's spirituality group. So it's you are woman, you grow out of the earth. So that's, kind of a chant. And so I'm singing that. And then when I come, at some point, it changes. The words change. And I sing, you are woman, you go back to the earth. It just came out of my mouth. And she let go right then in my hands. So it's such when I say it's such a magic time that so many things are possible, and it's a healing time also in families. Often there's stuff that's happening and the energy changes to that, to love. Really, the energy changes to what is true when a baby comes in. It is pure love, right? Look, and you go there. I mean, and the energy in the letting go, it changes to that. Yes.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah, we actually had somebody, a guest, come on, and a doctor who had worked in Canada and had, I think, worked in like many, many, many end of life situations. And he was actually saying, that even though Canada has a legal medical aid in dying, and there are states that are in the United States as well, he was sort of saying, people should really think seriously about how important those last moments can be, and how much they teach us, and how much of an important part of life they are. And not to say people shouldn't make that decision if that's what they choose, and if they, but just to kind of have a little more thought around, this isn't actually, this isn't actually a horrible thing. As you said, there's so many gifts there. Yeah. And I also wanted to kind of think back. One of the books that you wrote, I think is really important too, is the caregiver support book. And we talk a lot about caregivers. I think that's maybe a whole nother subject for another podcast, but I love that you did that work and wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Well, yes, I do, because I'm sometimes accused of doing too many things, maybe aren't connected, but they are all connected. They are all connected. I can't always explain it, but I know they are. That was my first book, Still Point. It's called Still Point. And we did a second edition of it because when I was working with another book, they said, you need to re-release that book. There's so many more caregivers now than when you actually wrote it, and so, and when I wrote it, it wasn't a big seller. I mean, it was, I don't know. People were, not that impressed. I don't think. I don't know. But
they weren't ready for it, Sheila. It's coming. You're ahead of your time.
Oh, that is exactly what my daughter said about me. In fact, the example my daughter would say, the trouble with my mother is she's ahead of her time. And her example, I'm speaking as my daughter, who's like 30 some years old. I was born, my mother had me with natural childbirth. And her friends are saying, oh, I don't believe she did that. I don't believe it. That was how she proved that I was ahead of my time.
Sure.
Yes. And so that's the good thing about living a long time. If you have to plan on living a long time, if you're going to be ahead of your time. So I'm having a pretty good time right now.
Yeah,
I have to say, I'm having a pretty good time. Yeah. So the woman, Christine Gautreaux, is the person that did it with me. And she's in the women's group with me. I've known her for many, many years. So we did it online, actually. She was in Atlanta and I was, we revised it. And then, of course, when the shutdown came, and we were in our rooms, she said, we've got to put this online. And I said, very positively determined, what we do is not going to work online. I just knew it wouldn't. And of course, I'm so glad I was wrong. I was totally wrong. So I like being wrong in that kind of situation, So that group is still meeting every week since it's 5 years now. I mean, it's just... And the other part I would say about it is we said to ourselves or to each other, well, people are going to need this now, Yes. And so, but so many times we would come off and say, boy, did I need that? We need it, right? So one of the things I've discovered is if we give what we need, sometimes it really works, right? It really works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
but yes, and
we end every episode of our podcast. We end talking to each other and saying, "Wow, that was so great, so good for us." So so we meet so many amazing people.
I bet.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's you have the same experience of you're giving something, but somehow you're getting a lot.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, it's very special. Very special.
We also like to ask if there's anything that frightens you about the end of life, having worked in this for as long as you have.
Well, I think when you talk to people about, people will say things like, well, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of pain, pain. And that's where I think we can be pretty reassured that that is something that our medical people have figured out about that pain part. I mean, and keep it so people can still be aware of they're not just, in a coma, there's still opportunities for more life. There is so much life in the dying. It's so interesting that would be, but there really is. There really is.
Really,
so much still growing, still happening. And so, so when you ask about what are my fears, I don't know. I've tried some things. Sometimes I think I have to be more, I tell myself I have to be more realistic, and one of the ways I think being aware of the fact that we're going to die is real. That's a real thing. And it's important because what it tells me is, so what do I want to do with this amount of time that I have? And it's getting shorter. everybody's is, but I'm already, I mean, I'm 85 years old. So, I mean, it's, I'm not going to die young. I mean, well, what happened? And yeah, so what do I what do I really want, or what is the best thing that, and that I can do? We are here for this time. I mean,
Right.
that's another thing I've been so aware of, is that the time that I was born and what was happening in the world and all of that has created who I am, and that has created the gifts I have, I think. So the opportunity to use those, is such a great thing that I would not want to be just stuck on the back burner somewhere,
So,
well,
so
and
basically,
being an old person, there are people that think you should not, I mean, that you don't have much to
they think you
offer.
should stop. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So in a way, it's similar, kind of the sense that we love this life. We want to spend this precious life as best we can. And that maybe the only fear we have is that we somehow will be denied the agency to do that, right? Yeah. So
Absolutely.
I totally hear you there. Yeah.
Yes. So, Sheila, what do you do to make sure you still have that energy to get out there and do what you're meant to be doing?
Well, I'd say that I'm a dancer. I say that I am a dancing social worker. Because, I've put these things together. But dance, I'm going more and more back to dance. I mean, as a principle even. And so, of course, I have been. In my life, I started out at 3 years old dancing. My mother always wanted to dance, and her mother wouldn't let her. So she gave me that opportunity and the love of it. I think she just gave it to me. So when things would happen in my life, I would just say, well, I don't know. I guess but I'm going to keep dancing, figure out a way to do that. Keep moving, keep dancing. And that was a good decision. For me, and and so, and I know that is, when people say, oh, well, you don't look your age or you have all this, it's dancing. It's not sitting down and, in front of the screen or staying in front of the screen. It's moving. And so, so I do every morning. I'm very good about, and my husband is even joining me now. The current one I'm doing is a program called Eccentrics, and it's actually a stretching and strengthening regimen. It takes about 20 minutes. And I mean, it just, well, and this, I don't know if this would make any sense to you, but one of the goals I had in life was if I could stand up straight for my whole life. Now, this sounds funny, but life pulls us forward, and then we can't get back up, really. And so everything is not in the right place anymore. And I can even tell you the moment when I made that decision, because there was Naomi Brill was her name, and she was my supervisor as a social worker. And I saw her enter the courtroom to testify. And as she walked in, I mean, what she said without words was, don't mess with me. I'm here to tell you the truth. And boy, they didn't. So, she was just hurt. She was so, her posture, her everything about her
carriage.
Yes. So anyway, that's what I said. Well, that's what I want. I want that.
I love that.
So how do you do it?
I think I'm going to do that too.
Yeah. And so that's what a lot of it is, postural work. It is having your body in balance. Yeah. So that's definitely something that I do that every day. Yeah.
Perfect. And you use that for your own resources, but you also share it. That's what's the beauty of it. You share
with
so many
well,
people.
And then of course in interplay, we always have warm up. We always have the way we think of it is you have to be in your body in order to have everything, all your resources available to you.
Yeah.
All your memories, all your stories, all your, if you're not in your body, then you don't have that. So that's
right.
Yeah. So I've been
true.
I came into interplay pretty early. It was started in 89, and I think I came in 91. So I've been doing it a long time.
You've been with them.
Beautiful.
Been part of the development of it. Yes.
It's beautiful. Yes. I know my wife has a great time with it. She keeps trying to get me to go. I guess I should do it sometime.
Well, and And I would even
Is
tell
there
you,
Interplay Colorado?
Oh,
well,
yeah, I'm sure there is.
yes, there is. Actually, there
Really?
is. Absolutely, there is a Colorado. But I do want to say to you, David, there is a reason that you may have some reticence, because we have rules about who gets to dance and what it means if you do it. So, so I had a son who was he got the dance gene. I mean, clearly he did. I mean, he had it was a kind of a natural thing, but he didn't become a dancer. He became a gymnast because,
Yeah.
guys can do that, right? So that is a lot of the notion that this is not okay in our culture for a man, especially a white man, to, what is he, a sissy? What's the matter with a guy? So, yeah.
And I love to dance. I do dance.
Dance is
a
a
lot of
universal
times.
piece.
Well, yeah, dance, but also just in general, when there's dancing happening, I get out and dance.
Well,
but it's
there you
often
go.
that I may be the only male out there sometimes. But
Right,
that's okay.
right. Well, it's great to see younger men claiming that. I mean,
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it is. You're maybe a little ahead of your time in terms of, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting toward the end of our time. I want to give the opportunity if there's anything else that you wish we had asked you about that you'd like to tell us before we move on to poetry.
Well, just to mention that the 4 arts that I focused on in the book, The Art of Grieving, I had this notion that maybe grieving itself should be an art, because it's something we're going to do all our lives. And so if that's the case, maybe the arts are the tools. And so I started, asking that question or thinking of it that way. So I focus on storytelling. I have a chapter on storytelling. I have a chapter on dance. I have a chapter on music. And I have a chapter on visual art and architecture. So if you think about a really good memorial service, it's going to be in a beautiful environment that lifts you up, right? It's going to affect your brain that way. And I remember my sons, they had huge bouquets of flowers because he had friends that were gay florists, and it was gorgeous, and and then there's music, right? There's music. So, and depending on your culture, depending on, what songs are relevant for you, that puts the whole group into a kind of entrainment, I would say. Everybody's becomes a large body that's connected through the music. Then, of course, we have story. People tell stories beforehand, afterwards, and sometimes as a eulogy. That's part of it too.
Yeah.
So, and then not as often dance, but I have danced. I danced at my son's funeral. And Rose was the one. She wanted me to dance at her funeral. And I never heard of that. But, she said she wanted that. Okay, I'll do it. And so I began to see that shouldn't be left out. That shouldn't be left out. And so I wrote about that. And sometimes I go back. I can always go back to that experience. And the experience, I would say, in relation to my son was that, so I'm at his service and I start to dance. And then I hear this, "What is she doing?" This kid's voice. And so I know. It's the 3-year-old. He's in the front row and he's saying out loud what everybody else is thinking. And so I go over to him and I say, "Well, I'm dancing for Uncle Ken. Would you like to dance with me?" Oh, and he does not. I mean, he climbs into his mother's pregnant belly lap. I mean, he does not want this. But the 5-year-old takes my hand. And so we start dancing. We start dancing together in honor of my son. And I mean, I lift him up. And when I do that, I realize that in the midst of the most sorrow I could ever imagine having, I am having also the most joy I could ever imagine. So I like to tell that story partly so we know we don't have to just say we're sad or we're happy. Maybe we're both.
Yes.
Maybe we're
We live in paradox. Paradox does exist.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Oh, that's such a beautiful story. Brought tears to
Yeah.
my eyes. Yeah, thank you for that.
Well, and you had mentioned about a poem, and in this poem that I was working with the sisters, and we were wanting something that would communicate the positivity of grief, the gift of grief
Yeah.
that we've already said a little bit about, the depth of the connection and the truth that we enter that we don't have in our regular life, almost a
Yeah.
transformative space. So anyway, the sisters came up with a poem that they thought would do this. And
Yeah.
it's called The Well of Grief. And it is a David White poem. And they also
Beautiful.
went in the closet and gave us a whole roll of fabric so that we could dance with it while the poem was being read. So
Beautiful.
I just wanted to, the poem is very short, but I wanted to give you the way we've been playing with this.
Yeah.
With this.
Share the experience.
Yeah. So first lines call attention to people's unwillingness to grieve and people who avoid grieving. And then later it talks about the rewards of grieving.
Okay.
So it's
Well,
a
let's
good
have
time
you
for
share
me to
it.
do it. All right.
Yeah.
It is one of my favorite poems. The Well of Grief. Those who will not slip between the still surface on the well of grief, turning downward through its black water to the place we cannot breathe, will never know the source from which we drink, the secret water, cold and clear, nor find in the darkness glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else. So I think we always wish for something else, when in the middle of it, and then we see what is there. We can have that assertion, even joy sometimes, if we're willing to mourn.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's such an incredibly beautiful poem.
Yes.
Love it. And so, so apropos of exactly our conversation at this time. So we really thank you for coming and for your incredible,
I
beautiful
appreciate the
stories in your
opportunity.
life.
I do. I appreciate the opportunity. It is really wonderful to share these ideas and these experiences that a lot of people don't know about, and people should know. It's like having a baby. If you know it's going to be okay, then you're maybe more willing to do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but I trust you all.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. We encourage you to subscribe to have access to premium episodes and extra resources. Links to our guests and their recommendations and a transcript of this episode will be in the podcast notes.
Yes, thank you so much. And please tell all your friends. Follow us on social media, and again, consider subscribing for some excellent premium content. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand. We also want to acknowledge that we live on unceded lands that have been cared for thousands of years by Indigenous peoples who are still here.